Richard Bennett shoved my 8-year-old grandson into the dining room wall hard enough to rattle framed photographs above him. For 1 second, nobody moved. Noah slid to the floor, one hand pressed against his shoulder, his breath coming in thin, frightened pulls. My daughter-in-law, Claire, did not run to him. She bent down, picked up a linen napkin, and began wiping the bourbon Richard had spilled across the hardwood. Her mother, Susan, kept her voice calm. "He needs to learn how to behave at the table." My son Daniel pushed his chair back. He rose halfway, met Richard's eyes, and stopped. Then he lowered himself into the chair again. That was the moment I understood that whatever had happened in that house had begun long before I arrived. I did not scream. I did not touch Richard. I told them I needed the bathroom, closed the door behind me, and called 911. I gave the dispatcher the address. I said an adult man had just injured an 8-year-old child and that the boy needed medical evaluation. I said Richard had been drinking. I said Noah appeared dazed and was holding his shoulder. The dispatcher told me not to move him unless there was immediate danger and to keep my distance from Richard until officers and paramedics arrived. Before leaving the bathroom, I opened the recording app on my phone and slipped it into my cardigan pocket. At the time, I believed that recording would save Noah. I was wrong. My phone captured only what happened afterward. The truth that finally stopped Richard from rewriting that night was stored somewhere else. But to explain that, I have to go back 5 months. I had not seen Noah since May. For his 8th birthday, I mailed him a card with 2 tickets to a minor league hockey game. He had once told me he liked the sound skates made on fresh ice. 2 weeks later, the envelope came back unopened. Claire texted that Noah was busy with summer activities. Daniel said everything was fine. I chose not to ask why an 8-year-old was too busy to call his grandmother. At the time, I called that respect later. I understood that sometimes respect for another family's boundaries is only fear wearing polite clothes. Then, on a Thursday evening in late October, Claire sent me a message. "Noah asked about you. Dinner Sunday?" There was no greeting and no warmth, but I read the message 3 times. Then I replied that I would be there. During the drive to Farmington, old details returned to me with new weight. There had been a video call when Noah stopped speaking the moment Richard entered the room. Daniel had once canceled a weekend visit because Noah had fallen while playing. In a photograph Claire posted during a July heat wave, Noah wore a long-sleeved sweatshirt while every other child wore a t-shirt. I had noticed each thing. I had simply refused to place them beside one another. Richard's house looked exactly as I remembered. Pale stone, black shutters, trimmed hedges, and expensive cars arranged across the driveway like evidence of a successful life. Inside, everything was polished and carefully positioned. Family portraits lined the walls. No shoes sat near the door. No toys interrupted the symmetry. On a bookshelf facing the dining room, I noticed a security camera. A green light glowed beneath the lens. Richard had once tapped it proudly and said, "Nothing happens in my house without me knowing." I remember looking at that light. Then Noah ran into the foyer and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Grandma, you came." When he reached up, his sleeve slipped toward his elbow. A fading bruise circled the inside of his forearm. I crouched beside him and kept my voice low. "What happened there, sweetheart?" Noah's eyes moved past me toward the dining room. "I don't remember," he said. Richard's house was the kind people admired before they entered it. From the driveway, everything announced success. Pale stone, black shutters, clipped hedges, and 3 polished cars arranged beneath the evening lights. Claire's SUV sat closest to the garage. though I knew the registration belonged to Bennett Motor Group. Nothing in that driveway was simply owned. Everything was attached to a favor. Inside, the impression sharpened. The furniture looked untouched. Family photographs were spaced with the precision of a showroom display. Cameras watched from the foyer, the hallway, and the corner above the dining room doors. The house looked protected, but it did not feel safe. It was not designed for people to live comfortably. It was designed to prove that Richard Bennett had won. At dinner, Richard talked about money before the soup bowls were cleared. He reminded Claire that he had covered the down payment on the house. He asked whether Noah's private school tuition had posted correctly. Then he looked at Daniel and smiled. Imagine trying to keep all this afloat on warehouse money. Daniel managed operations for a medical supply distributor. He supervised 40 employees, handled shipping failures, and solved problems before most customers knew they existed. Richard described the job as if Daniel spent his days moving boxes. I built companies, Richard said. You manage other men's inventory. Daniel stared at his plate. Claire touched his wrist beneath the table. Dad only wants to help, she said. Richard leaned back. I don't control anyone. I just pay for the things other people can't afford. Claire reminded Daniel, softly but clearly enough for everyone to hear, that her father had paid for Noah's summer camp and tuition. She did not sound proud. She sounded frightened that Daniel might forget the rules of the room. Susan immediately asked whether anyone wanted more potatoes. That was how she worked. When Richard threatened, Susan translated. When he humiliated someone, she called it teasing. When silence became uncomfortable, she poured another drink and moved the conversation somewhere safer. I realized she had spent most of her life turning warnings into advice. Richard shifted his attention to Noah. Football sign-ups are next month. Noah's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Daniel cleared his throat. He wants to play hockey. Richard laughed. Hockey is expensive. You already pay for his school, Daniel said carefully. I can cover hockey. Richard's smile disappeared. You can barely cover what you have, Claire whispered. Daniel. He likes hockey, Daniel said. Children like many things, Richard replied. Adults decide what is good for them. Noah looked at Claire before answering, as though her face contained the correct response. Football could be fun, he said. He ate more slowly after that. He cut each piece of chicken into identical squares. Before lifting his water glass, he asked, May I? No child should need permission to drink water at his own dinner table. Richard said his name once, only to ask for the salt, and Noah's shoulders rose immediately. I watched him finish food he clearly did not want. He left nothing behind, not a green bean, not a crumb of bread. He had learned that appetite mattered less than avoiding attention. Then Richard's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and stepped toward the bar. No, move the file to North Harbor LLC, he said quietly. I don't want the Bennett name on the first version. He turned his back to us. Beside the bourbon bottles sat a folder of invoices. North Harbor LLC appeared in the upper corner of the first page. I did not touch it. I did not make an accusation. Years of financial work had taught me that a name was not proof, but I remembered it. Richard returned to the table and refilled his glass. Noah shifted in his chair. His shoe tapped the table leg. The movement was small. The bourbon tipped over the rim of Richard's glass and spread across the white tablecloth. Every sound in the room stopped. Richard placed one hand flat on the table. Noah, he said, come here. The boy did not ask what he had done wrong. He simply stood, as if he already knew what was coming next. Richard moved before anyone else did. He reached across the space between them. caught Noah by the front of his shirt, and pulled him forward. The motion was fast, almost practiced. Then he shoved the boy toward the wall. There was a hard sound. Noah slid down and sat on the floor, stunned. One hand went to the side of his neck. His crying was so quiet that, for a moment, it sounded more like breathing than tears. Nobody spoke. The silence after it was worse than the impact. Claire was the first to move. "Dad, that was too much." But she did not go to Noah. She bent toward the table, grabbed a napkin, and began blotting bourbon from the white cloth before it reached the floor. Claire kept blotting the cloth, pressing harder each time, as though the stain were the only damage she still knew how to face. Susan shook her head. "Do not make this bigger than it is. He needs to learn to be careful." Daniel pushed his chair back and stood. Richard turned toward him. "Sit down. Do not make your son softer than he already is." Daniel stopped. I watched my son look at Noah, then at Richard, then at Claire. For one terrible second, I could see him measuring the cost of each possible choice. Then he sat down. That was the moment he chose peace for himself over safety for his child. Every part of me wanted to cross the room and pull Noah into my arms. But he was holding his neck. His breathing was uneven. If there was an injury, moving him carelessly could make it worse. If I attacked Richard or started shouting, the room would become chaos before help arrived. I forced my hands to stay still. "I need the bathroom," I said. Richard waved me away as though I were no longer worth noticing. I closed the bathroom door, locked it, and called 911. I gave the dispatcher the address. I said an 8-year-old child had just been shoved into a wall by an adult man. I said the boy was complaining of pain near his neck, seemed dazed, and was having trouble taking full breaths. I said the man had been drinking and that everyone involved was still inside the house. The dispatcher told me not to move Noah unless he was in immediate danger. She told me to keep my distance from Richard and wait for police and emergency medical services. Before leaving the bathroom, I opened the recording app on my phone and slipped it into my cardigan pocket. When I returned, Noah was still on the floor. Richard stood over him. "I corrected him once," Richard said. "Children need consequences." Claire spoke so softly I almost missed it. "You could have hurt him." Richard looked at her. "The next time he will remember." I did not argue. I knelt several feet from Noah and kept my voice steady. "Sweetheart, do your fingers feel numb?" He shook his head. "Are you dizzy?" "A little." "Do not move yet. Help is coming." Richard laughed. "You called someone?" I did not answer. The first police officer arrived within minutes, followed by another patrol car. Emergency medical workers came in behind them, carrying bags and a stretcher. Richard immediately changed his story. "The boy slipped." Susan said she had not seen clearly. Claire said her father had only touched Noah lightly. Daniel said nothing. An officer separated the adults and asked each of us to remain in different areas. I gave my statement in order, where everyone had been seated. What Richard had said, what he had done, what Noah had done afterward. And when I called 911, I did not mention my old job. I did not ask for special treatment. I described only what I had seen and what I had heard. The paramedics checked Noah's breathing, pupils, arms, and neck. They told him they wanted to take him to the hospital for further evaluation. One of them crouched beside him. "You get to choose who rides with you. Who do you want?" Noah looked at Claire, then Susan, then Richard. Finally, he pointed at Daniel. "My dad!" Daniel covered his mouth. Tears filled his eyes, but he nodded and moved carefully to Noah's side. As the paramedics prepared to take him outside, Noah reached for my hand. "Grandma," he whispered, If I tell the truth, will we stop being a family? I opened my mouth. Before I could answer, the ambulance doors closed. At the hospital, the waiting felt longer than the night itself. Doctors moved Noah through imaging, neurological checks, and observation while Daniel and I sat beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look exhausted. Claire had arrived separately with Susan, but staff kept us apart while police and hospital personnel spoke with each of us. Near midnight, a physician came to us. Noah had a small, stable fracture in his upper cervical spine. There was no neurological damage. He would need a brace, close observation, follow-up imaging, and strict limits on activity. The doctor paused before adding, "A slightly different angle or more force could have caused a much more serious injury." Daniel folded forward and covered his face. "I was standing right there," he said. "I know," I replied. "Noah knows too." He looked at me as though he had expected comfort. I loved my son. That did not mean I could rescue him from the truth. For years, Daniel said, Richard had humiliated him in front of Claire, Noah, employees, and anyone else who would listen. Whenever Daniel pushed back, Claire reminded him who had paid the down payment, whose company owned her SUV, and who covered Noah's tuition. "I thought if I kept everything calm, Noah would be safe," Daniel said. "I thought I was absorbing it." "You were not absorbing it," I said. "Noah was paying for the calm." Daniel flinched. "That is an explanation," I told him. "It is not responsibility yet." Before dawn, a Department of Children and Families investigator named Hannah Brooks arrived. She spoke with me, Daniel, and Claire separately. She told us she would interview Noah only when the medical team believed he was ready. Hannah did not treat Daniel as safe simply because he had not put his hands on Noah. She asked him, "How many times did you see your son become afraid of Richard before tonight?" Daniel stared at the floor. He could not answer. Claire insisted that Richard had frightened Noah but had never meant to injure him. Hannah asked whether intent had mattered while Noah lay on the floor. Claire began crying and said her father had been strict, that everyone misunderstood him when he was angry. Hannah did not argue. She wrote something in her notebook and asked whether Claire could promise that Richard would never be allowed near Noah again. Claire looked through the glass towards Susan before answering. That hesitation told me more than her explanation did. The hospital and DCF created a temporary safety plan. Noah would be discharged to Daniel, but father and son would stay at my house. Richard would have no contact with Noah. Claire could communicate only under agreed conditions while the investigation continued. An emergency family court hearing would be requested, and Daniel would have to cooperate with a protective capacity assessment. Nothing in the plan called Daniel a hero. It asked him to prove that Noah would be safe with him. While the paperwork was prepared, I stood alone in the hallway and thought about the unopened birthday card, the bruise beneath Noah's sleeve, the calls that ended whenever Richard entered the room. Each time, I had told myself, "That is Daniel's family." I had spent decades studying financial records, noticing when numbers failed to align, and refusing explanations that did not fit the evidence. Yet when the inconsistencies involved my grandson, I had accepted them because asking harder questions might have made me unwelcome. I had called that restraint. Now it looked more like fear. When Noah woke fully, I sat beside him. The brace made his movements careful, but his eyes were clear. "Grandma," he whispered, "did I break our family?" I took his hand. "You spilled a little bourbon," I said. "The adults are the ones who broke the family." He watched my face, searching for anger. There was none. The next morning, Daniel's phone rang while we were waiting for discharge instructions. His expression changed as he listened. Claire had filed for emergency custody. Her petition accused Daniel and me of removing Noah without her consent, influencing his account, and deliberately separating a mother from her child. Daniel handed me the document. Near the bottom, beneath Claire's signature, one sentence had been underlined by her attorney. Noah slipped and struck the wall on his own. Rachel Kim listened to the recording twice without interrupting. She sat at my kitchen table with headphones over her ears, one hand resting beside a yellow legal pad. Daniel paced near the window while Noah slept upstairs. When the recording ended, Rachel removed the headphones. "It helps," she said, "but it does not prove the shove." My phone had captured Richard saying children needed consequences. It had captured Claire warning that he could have hurt Noah and Richard, answering that Noah would remember next time. But the recording began after the impact. There was no image of Richard grabbing Noah, no clear sound that identified exactly what had happened, and no uninterrupted chain between the injury and his words. "His attorney will say he was describing discipline, not an assault," Rachel said. "Claire and Susan have already changed their statements." Daniel stopped pacing. "But Noah has a fracture." "Yes," Rachel replied. "We have a serious case. Serious does not mean easy to prove." At the hearing, Claire's attorney used those gaps immediately. He described my recording as a frightened grandmother's interpretation and argued that the injury could not identify who had caused it. Rachel objected when he suggested Noah had been coached, but I understood the strategy. They did not need to prove Richard innocent that morning. They only needed to make everyone uncertain about what could be established legally. The next complication arrived that afternoon. Police returned to the Bennett house with additional paperwork and found the damaged section of wall patched, sanded, and painted. Richard said he had only repaired his property. Officers had photographed the area before leaving that night, but the speed of the repair made the house feel less restored than cleaned. Daniel read the report and slammed it onto the table. "He is erasing everything." "Then we document that too," Rachel said. DCF was not waiting for Richard's case to resolve. Hannah Brooks gave Daniel a list of expectations. He had to complete a protective capacity assessment, explain earlier incidents, attend counseling, and establish housing that did not depend entirely on me. Staying at my house was acceptable temporarily. Building his future around my rescue was not. Daniel looked offended. "I did not hurt Noah." Hannah's expression did not change. "No, but you were responsible for protecting him." After she left, Daniel said he felt as though he were being punished alongside Richard. "They do not need to decide whether you are a bad person," I told him. "They need to decide whether Noah is safe with you." Noah's interview took place 2 days later in a room with soft chairs and no family members present. Hannah did not force answers. When Noah became quiet, she waited. I told her he was afraid his mother would lose the house. He asked whether Richard would go to jail. He worried that Daniel and Claire would divorce and that everyone would know he had caused it. When I saw him afterward, he whispered, "What if people hate me?" "You do not have to tell the story to help me win," I said. "You only have to speak when you feel safe." He leaned against my side but did not answer. Rachel found the next piece while reviewing school records. Noah's teacher had emailed months earlier about bruising on his arm, repeated exhaustion, and the way he panicked when an adult raised a voice. Daniel had never seen the messages. Claire controlled the school account. The emails had been deleted from the shared inbox, though the school retained copies. Daniel seized on that immediately. "She hid it from me." "She did," I said. but you let someone else manage every part of your son's life because asking questions might have started an argument. His anger collapsed into silence. Then police obtained the home security recorder. The files from the night of the incident were gone. System logs showed that an administrator account had accessed the recorder remotely after Noah left in the ambulance. The relevant video had been deleted soon afterward. Richard claimed the system automatically overwrote old footage. The technicians studying the logs did not believe the timing was accidental, but deletion alone did not recover the missing images. He turned to me. "Do you remember whether the house used local storage only or a cloud plan?" I thought of Richard tapping the camera beneath its green light, proud of the money he spent and the control it gave him. His exact words returned to me. "I pay so I never lose a single second of footage." The camera company confirmed the subscription 2 days later. Richard had paid for 30 days of cloud storage. Deleting the files had not erased the remote copy. Police obtained a warrant and recovered the footage from Sunday evening. Rachel called Daniel and me into her office before anyone showed it to Noah. The camera did not capture the entire room. A cabinet blocked part of the wall, and Richard's body obscured Noah at the moment of impact, but the recording showed enough. Richard reached across the table, caught Noah by the shirt, and pulled him from his chair. Then came the sound of Noah striking the wall. Daniel rose. Richard turned toward him. Daniel stopped. Claire's voice was clear. "Dad, you could have broken his neck," Richard answered without lowering his voice. "Then he will remember longer." Susan appeared near the edge of the frame holding a napkin. "Do not let him make trouble for the whole family." A few minutes later, after I had gone to call 911, Claire leaned toward her father and whispered, "If anyone asks." Noah slipped. The room in Rachel's office remained silent after the video ended. It destroyed Claire's sworn claim that Noah had fallen on his own. It showed that Richard had not merely touched him while trying to correct his behavior. It proved Claire understood how dangerous the act had been, and that Susan's first concern was protecting the family's story. It also showed Daniel standing up and then choosing not to cross the room. No one escaped that recording clean. Daniel stared at the frozen image of himself beside the table. "I want to turn it off," he said. "Noah had to live through that moment," I replied. "The least you can do is look at it once." Rachel did not stop the video. Daniel watched it again, the second time. He did not explain Richard's power, Claire's fear, or the money attached to the house. He simply sat with what he had done. When the screen went dark, he told Rachel he would enter counseling. He would return the company vehicle, stop depending on Richard's money, and find a home he could maintain himself. "I cannot ask Noah to trust me while I am still living inside the arrangement that failed him," he said. For the first time since the hospital, his words sounded like responsibility rather than shame. Claire's attorney showed her the same recording. He advised her to separate from Richard, correct her statement, and cooperate with DCF. According to Rachel, Claire kept asking what would happen to the house, the tuition, and the SUV if her father withdrew support. "If I take Daniel's side," she said, "my father will take everything." Her attorney asked, "What is left worth keeping if the price is your son?" Claire did not answer. The medical records and recovered video changed the criminal case. Prosecutors amended the charges against Richard to reflect Noah's injury and the evidence of intentional force. The court issued a criminal protective order barring Richard from contacting Noah directly or through another person. The order did not heal Noah. It did not repair Daniel's failure or Claire's choice, but it changed the balance of power. Richard could no longer decide whether distance existed between himself and the child. News of his arrest reached the local paper. A photograph showed Richard leaving court in a dark coat, irritated rather than ashamed. The article mentioned Bennett Motor Group, his charitable donations, and the allegations involving his grandson. 1 week later, investigators received an email from a woman named Mia Torres. She identified herself as a former controller for Bennett Motor Group. This is not the first time Richard Bennett has deleted records after someone asked questions. She wrote, "Attached was an older email bearing Richard's company address. If a record makes us look bad, the record should not exist." Mia also included documents she had preserved after being fired for refusing to alter vehicle records. Rachel warned us not to contact her directly. The financial material would be reviewed through separate legal channels. Noah's case could not become an excuse for a private investigation. I agreed. Still, when an investigator later showed Rachel the index of Mia's documents, one name appeared repeatedly across invoices, transfer sheets, and internal messages: North Harbor, LLC. It was the same name I had seen beside Richard's bourbon bottles on the night of the dinner. Daniel returned the Bennett Motor Group SUV on a Monday morning. He left the keys at the dealership reception desk and walked 3 miles to the bus stop because he refused to call me for a ride. By the end of the week, he had signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment above a pharmacy in West Hartford. The furniture came from thrift stores and online listings. The couch had one faded arm. The kitchen table had 3 chairs that did not match. Daniel bought everything with his own money. He did not ask me to cover the deposit. He also accepted that the Farmington house might have to be sold or divided during the divorce. That frightened him, but not as much as the thought of Noah learning that safety always depended on Richard's generosity. When Daniel showed Noah the apartment, the boy walked from room to room without speaking. "There is no playroom?" he finally asked. "No," Daniel said, "but no one here gets to make you afraid." Noah looked at him, as if deciding whether those words could be trusted. Daniel's counseling began the following week. The therapist asked him what he had meant whenever he said he wanted peace in the family. Daniel eventually admitted that peace had often meant obedience. I had allowed Claire to manage school messages, medical appointments, activities, and nearly every difficult decision involving Noah. He told himself she was more organized. The truth was that letting Claire handle everything allowed him to avoid arguments with Richard. He had also avoided looking too closely at Noah's fear. Seeing it clearly would have required him to act. Saying that aloud did not repair anything. It only made denial harder. Claire's first supervised visit took place in a family services room with toys, books, and a clock mounted where everyone could see it. She brought Noah his favorite cookies. For several minutes, she talked about school and the weather. Then she said, "Grandpa only lost his temper. He never meant for you to get hurt." Noah stopped eating. Claire reached across the table. "Do you miss me?" Noah pulled his hands into his lap. "I want to go now." The supervisor asked whether he was certain. He nodded. No one made him stay. When Daniel picked him up, Noah seemed confused by how easily the word no had opened a door. Claire called Daniel afterward and accused him of turning Noah against her. Rachel answered during the next conference. "Noah is not refusing you because Daniel told him to," she said. "He is refusing because you are still asking him to take care of your feelings." Claire began to cry. For once, no one rushed to make her stop. 2 nights later, Noah dropped a drinking glass in the new apartment. It struck the kitchen floor and shattered. Noah folded inward immediately. He raised both hands over his head and began apologizing before the last piece stopped moving. Daniel froze. Then he knelt several feet away. "Stay where you are," he said gently. "There is glass near your feet." Noah kept apologizing. Daniel took a broom from the closet. "The glass can be replaced," he said. "You cannot." Noah did not cry. He watched Daniel sweep the pieces into a dustpan and wipe the floor twice. Several minutes passed. "Are you really not mad?" Noah asked. Daniel set the broom against the wall. "I am angry with myself for letting you believe this was normal." Noah did not hug him. He sat on the floor beside Daniel, while Daniel checked for smaller pieces beneath the cabinets. Their shoulders did not touch. Trust did not return through a speech. It returned through distances that became smaller without anyone forcing them closed. Across town, Richard was facing a different kind of fracture. He told Susan that North Harbor LLC was registered in her name. The signatures on its filings, transfer documents, and banking forms were hers. If investigators asked questions, he said, she needed to explain that the decisions had been hers as well. Susan stared at him. Only then did she understand why Richard had kept her name on documents he claimed were meaningless. He had not been protecting her, he had been preparing her that evening. Susan waited until Richard left for the dealership. Then she locked the bedroom door and called an attorney who had never represented her husband or his companies. When the attorney answered, Susan spoke without greeting him. "I think my husband intends to let me go to prison for him." Mia Torres did not arrive with a complete case. She arrived with pieces. There were internal emails, records for vehicles that had suffered serious flood or collision damage, instructions routing titles through North Harbor LLC, spreadsheets showing revenue gaps, and messages directing employees to break large cash deposits into smaller amounts. She also had copies of complaints she had made inside Bennett Motor Group and the termination notice that followed. Before handing over anything, Mia met with her own attorney. She provided only documents she had lawfully retained or materials her lawyer confirmed she could disclose. She knew about my former work and asked to meet me at a coffee shop in West Hartford. "I need to know what matters," she said. "What matters first is how you obtained it," I replied. Mia asked whether I could access company accounts, call former investigators, or find records that might still exist inside the dealerships. I refused. I would not enter anyone's system, search for confidential files, or call old contacts to manufacture an investigation. Noah's case had already taught me what happened when people believed their private purpose excused the rules. I helped Mia build a timeline. We separated documents that directly showed instructions from those that only raised questions. We marked what she had personally witnessed and what she had heard from others. Then I helped her find an independent whistleblower attorney who had no connection to Daniel, Claire, or me. "If the truth needs me to bend the law to stand up," I told her, "it will fall the moment I take my hand away." The investigation did not move like a storm. It moved like winter. Over several months, the State Motor Vehicle Authority opened a review. Former customers were contacted. Title histories were compared across state lines. The bank financing. Richard's inventory demanded explanations for irregular transfers and missing documents. Richard continued operating while the reviews were pending. That delay made him bolder. He threatened employees who spoke to investigators. He blamed Mia for every discrepancy. He ordered staff to delete messages and replace files. Each attempt to protect himself created another record, another witness, or another reason for investigators to look more closely. Susan's cooperation began through her attorney. She turned over emails containing Richard's instructions, account lists, copies of text messages, and documents showing that ownership of North Harbor LLC had been shifted more heavily into her name after Noah was taken to the hospital. Susan did not pretend she had acted from courage. "I stayed silent because silence always protected me," she told investigators. "I only started talking when I realized it would not protect me anymore." Her honesty did not erase what she had done. It did make her more useful than another carefully edited apology. Richard learned of her cooperation before he learned exactly what she had provided. He called Daniel late one afternoon. "Your mother is destroying everything I built," he said. Daniel stood in the kitchen of the small apartment while Noah worked on homework in the next room. "My mother called 911, Daniel answered. "Everything after that came from things you did before she ever entered your house." Richard began shouting. Daniel ended the call. He did not ask Claire whether he had gone too far. He did not call me for approval. For the first time, he stood up without needing someone else to tell him that standing was allowed. The business did not collapse in a single week. After an administrative hearing, 1. Bennett location was temporarily suspended. The bank froze part of the company's inventory financing. Several employees resigned rather than sign revised statements. Customers filed civil claims after learning that vehicle histories might have been concealed. Richard's name disappeared from the donor wall of a local youth center. Nothing happened quickly enough to satisfy anger, but each consequence came from records, witnesses, and choices Richard had made before anyone challenged him. The same community that had once praised his generosity began asking where the money had come from. Months after the first email from Mia, the prosecutor requested a meeting with Rachel, Daniel, and me. She made one point clear: Richard would not face consequences only for what happened to Noah. A grand jury was reviewing the financial records connected to North Harbor LLC, the dealerships, and the altered title files. Susan had been offered the opportunity to cooperate in exchange for consideration of reduced liability. 3 rooms decided what remained of the Bennett family. Each room asked a different question: what Richard had done, whether Daniel had changed, and what Claire still owed her son. The first was a criminal courtroom. Richard's attorney tried to turn the case into a story about resentment. He suggested that I had always disliked Richard, that I had used my financial background to punish him, and that Daniel wanted freedom from the obligations attached to the Bennett family's money. He also implied that Noah's memories had been shaped by adults. I did not argue with the lawyer. I described where I had been seated, what I saw, the exact time I called 911, and the moment I started recording. I also said clearly that my phone had not captured the shove itself. That admission seemed to surprise him, but the truth did not become weaker because I acknowledged its limits. It became harder to distort. Then Daniel testified. He did not call himself brave. "I stood up," he said. "Then I sat down. I want to say I had no other choice, but that is not true. I chose what felt less frightening to me, and my son carried the rest." His voice broke, but he did not look away. The statement wounded him more than any accusation could have. It also showed the court that he was no longer protecting himself with silence. Susan testified next. She confirmed that Richard had ordered the security footage deleted, that he regularly used money to control family decisions, and that he told everyone to say Noah had slipped. She admitted helping him preserve that story. "I was afraid of him," she said, "but I was also protected by the life he paid for." Both things were true. She did not ask the jury to see her as innocent. Her cooperation mattered, but cooperation did not transform years of complicity into courage. The recovered video, medical records, police photographs, and testimony left Richard with fewer places to hide. He was convicted in the case involving Noah. The judge imposed a prison sentence that required actual time in custody, followed by years of probation. A criminal protective order barred Richard from contacting Noah directly or through anyone else. For the first time, Richard could not purchase a different version of events. He could not threaten someone into silence or redefine fear as respect. The second room was family court. Months had passed by then. Daniel had maintained the apartment, completed counseling, followed every part of the safety plan, and cooperated with DCF. He never pressured Noah to testify, forgive him, or choose sides. The court awarded Daniel sole physical custody. The ruling was not a reward for Daniel. It was work the court expected him to keep doing. Claire was allowed supervised visitation. She could ask for the arrangement to be reviewed only after completing the required intervention program and demonstrating that she could protect Noah without minimizing Richard's conduct. She was also forbidden from allowing Richard or Susan any contact with Noah. The financial case moved separately. Richard later faced additional charges connected to North Harbor LLC and the altered vehicle records. After administrative proceedings, dealership licenses were suspended. One location was sold, another closed, and the remaining assets were used to satisfy creditors and civil claims. Susan received consideration for cooperating, but not immunity from everything she had signed or concealed. She faced consequences for her own choices. No one emerged untouched. The third room was a quiet conference room where Claire asked to speak with me. She looked older than she had a year earlier. "I grew up afraid," she said. "I believe you," I replied. She waited, perhaps expecting belief to become forgiveness. "It explains why you stood still," I continued. "It does not make standing still right." Claire lowered her eyes. "Do you think Noah will ever forgive me?" "That is not mine to answer." She looked toward the door. "You have the right to change," I said. "You do not have the right to ask Noah to become proof that you changed," Claire cried quietly. I did not comfort her, but I did not leave either. That evening, Daniel and Noah returned to their apartment. Daniel placed a fan of paint samples on the kitchen table. "You get to choose the color of your bedroom walls," he said. Noah studied the cards carefully. "What if I choose the wrong one?" Daniel smiled. "Then we paint it again." 1 year later, Daniel and Noah lived in the small apartment above the pharmacy. There was no large yard, finished basement, or furniture chosen from catalogs. Most of what they owned came from thrift stores, online listings, or neighbors who were moving. Daniel paid every bill himself. Noah attended the public school 3 blocks away. His bedroom walls were painted pale blue. He had chosen the color. Healing did not arrive all at once. Noah startled when a door slammed. He needed to know the week's schedule in advance. He did not want to see Susan, and no one asked him to reconsider. He agreed to see Claire only during supervised visits. But other things changed. He played hockey because he wanted to. He invited a classmate home and did not apologize for making noise. He poured water without asking permission. Some evenings, he left food on his plate. The first time he did, Daniel looked at the unfinished carrots and said only, "Put the plate by the sink when you're done." Noah watched him carefully. Nothing else happened. Little by little, he learned that mistakes did not automatically summon anger. Claire completed the intervention program required by the court. She rented a 1-bedroom apartment, found steady work at a medical office, and paid her own expenses. She arrived on time for every supervised visit. She stopped criticizing Daniel and me in front of Noah. Most importantly, she stopped demanding that he call her mom. During one visit, Noah sat with her for 10 minutes before asking to leave. Pain crossed Claire's face, but she did not ask him to stay. "Okay," she said. "I'll still come next time." It was not forgiveness. It was not a repaired relationship. It was the first sign that Claire was learning to respect a boundary even when it hurt her. One evening, Daniel came to my house after dropping Noah at hockey practice. "I used to think you saved him that night," he said. "I made a phone call," I replied. "You are the one who has to wake up every morning and prove to him that night will not happen again." Daniel nodded. He no longer needed me to speak for him, pay his bills, or make every decision. I was learning something too. Love did not require me to control every outcome. Sometimes it meant standing close enough to help and far enough away to let someone else grow. That winter, Noah spent a Saturday night at my house, near midnight. I woke and noticed the hallway was dark. For months, he had needed the light left on. Darkness had once made him afraid that something might happen before he could see it coming. His bedroom door was open. I looked inside. Noah was asleep beneath the quilt, one hand resting beside his face. His breathing was calm. I did not wake him to ask whether he had turned off the light himself. I did not call Daniel to announce a breakthrough. I stood there for a moment, then returned to bed. I thought about the wall in Richard's dining room. He had repaired it quickly, as if fresh paint could erase what happened there. Paint can cover a mark. It cannot change the truth. The blue walls in Noah's new room covered nothing. They existed because a child had been asked what he wanted and someone had listened. People often say I saved Noah with one phone call. That call lasted less than 2 minutes. What saved him came afterward. Daniel learning how to be a father. Claire learning not to make her son responsible for her feelings. The courts holding firm boundaries. And Noah being allowed to decide what safety looked like. Justice began with a phone call. Healing began the next morning. Where are you listening from tonight? And who do you believe betrayed Noah most deeply? The grandfather who hurt him, the mother who hid the truth, or the father who remained silent too long? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story reminded you that quiet people are sometimes the first to stand when standing matters most, subscribe so you do not miss the next story. Wherever you are, take care of the smallest people around you, especially the children who learned silence too early.